Great. Thank you very much, Klaus. Then thank you all very much for being here this afternoon. I'm Michaella Vanore and one of the managing editors of the Journal of Population Economics. I'm really excited that we have the chance to be part of this panel today, or part of this discussion, which of course, as you know, is a session in the bigger Global Labor Organization's 2022 Global Conference. As some of you have probably seen from the announcements on the GLO website and other places, the objective of this conference is to reflect on the field of population economics, and it gives us the opportunity as, let's say, practitioners, as scholars, as researchers, to reflect a bit on the interactions between scientists and between the wicked problems that our research can inform, which we certainly know we have a limitless supply of. As part of the session today, we will be split, let's say, into two different kinds of objectives, or into two different components. So in the first part of this session, or of this panel, we'll have the chance to reflect a bit on the field through the Journal of Population Economics, which is celebrating its 35th birthday. And congratulations to everybody on the call who's actually been part of this big history. As part of this first part of the discussion, I will turn first actually to Klaus Zimmermann, who will give us a bit of a history of the Journal of Population Economics before we turn over to Martina, Bihn, who will be reflecting a bit on it as well. We're also very lucky that in this session, we have the chance to talk about one of the great papers that has actually been published in the Journal of Population Economics recently. We will be giving the Kuznets Prize to the winners, Garima, Rastogi, and Anisha Sharma, who are actually joining us today. The second half of the session will be a panel that reflects on the path of population economics, and that's chaired by our colleague Oded Galor, who is also here. Before we start, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping rules, just so that we are all aware of how we will proceed this afternoon. I will be periodically popping in and out of the discussion to guide us in between the sessions. So I'll be introducing some of the speakers, and I'll also be moderating the discussion or the questions if there are any. Of course, by this point in your lives, you're probably all used to being on Zoom. But just as a reminder, if you would please be so kind as to mute your microphones when you're not speaking, in case there are any interruptions on the line. Please also feel free to give comments or to raise questions. And if you would be so kind, you can either pop your questions or comments into the chat box, or you're welcome to use the Zoom raise hand feature, and I can moderate the discussion that way. I think without further ado, I can immediately turn over to Klaus, who will have the first role in speaking to us about 35 years of the Journal of Population Economics. So Klaus, please, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. So I have to share my screen again. Let me see where I find what I want. Do you see something? I guess not.
Only the desktop.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what has happened here too many times. I think that's it. You see that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, yeah, 35 years sounds a lot, and you expect me probably to talk for hours, but I don't know, I could, of course, with all the history we had since then, but that's not probably to do today. Now, the Journal of Population Economics is, as you can see, a journal dealing with research on economics of population, household, and human resources. We are globally oriented to economic demography, family, household, labor. We are a field journal. Applied theory is all fine with full articles. So no comments and notes. And we have 4 issues per year. And until recently, we have only published 40 issues, 40 papers per issue in the recent years. Now, the newest issue, however, is already out for 2023. As you know, we have seen and will see also in the next session articles from that issue. Now, if you go back to history, the whole thing started 1988 in a situation where we had very thin issues. Yes, when I can hold that, when you can see that, I'm not sure it's very thin. It's a few pages. It's issue, and the whole volume had 303 pages. The 2022 volume has 1,940 pages. It's 6 times as large as the one, and one issue looks like that, very thick. But it looks like a huge book. Now, the journal has published 1,468 articles in total. That's at least the statistic says. And the total page count of all articles is 34,086 pages exactly. Well, in '88, we have been 4 editors, 1 managing editor and 19 associate editors. Well, in 2022, we have 1 editor-in-chief, 8 editors, 2 managing editors, and 34 associate editors. So there is a quite rise in activity, as we can see. Well, it's more difficult to find the number of reviewers, but at least to give us a feeling, this year, we used 476 unique reviewers, some of them a few times. So it's a huge crowd doing the whole thing. And there have been, of course, lots of editors in the past, from the beginning, in all types of functions, coming and also going, and as an editor-in-chief and the managing editor at the starting moment, 35 years ago, I have to be very, very grateful for the generous support I got, not only from the publisher, that's another issue, but also from the many colleagues who engaged early and in the process for the journal. Now, certainly, this is a group photo of people who have been very relevant to this journal, the work of Jakob Mintzer, the man second from the left, and Gary Becker, the man at the right-hand side, very instrumental for the setup of the journal, and of course Jim Heckman, who is still with us and works with us, is on the left-hand side, is as kind of heroes for the whole profession in this type. So I'm not sure who was this man. I forgot to mention who holds also this nice picture. Well, you can guess, the younger Klaus Zimmermann. Okay, now a little bit more on history. Well, I'm very, very happy to see that man here, Werner Müller, at that time publishing editor at Springer Verlag. In 1985, he was so kind to publish my book, Familienökonomie, Family Economics, which was part of what came out of my thesis, or actually is my thesis. And since I was just a person who finished the PhD, it was a great honor to publish with Springer in a prominent book series at that time. Well, that was important because the original contacts were quite relevant. He worked in Heidelberg, and I was doing my PhD in Mannheim at the University of Mannheim. That's nearby, so we could meet in person early on. And that was a kind of relationship which was relevant for me, but also for the journal for a long time. Now, in 1986, I got the honor to be a research fellow at CORE, the University Catholique de Louvain, on the initiative of Jacques Drèze, who was the director at that time. One should know that at that time, CORE was the only academic lively island in Europe, on the continent of Europe, if you exclude the UK with the London School of Economics and so on. So that was a very big thing, and I could see how centers and groups are working if they're highly productive and internationally visible. I also met Pierre Pessiot there, who became one of the editors of the journal later. Now, Jacques at that time was behind the creation of the European Economic Association, And that development I learned when I was at that time there. And I was impressed by what was going on to make Europe more vibrant. Well, 1987, I became a visiting associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania on the initiative of Mark Nerloff, who was a research partner of my PhD supervisor, Heinz König. And for both of these people, I was working for quite a while. But the year in the United States was very important for me because I learned about the relevance of globalization and international collaboration. And also, Mark Nerloff was doing many things, but he was also doing population economics, and he confirmed my interest in this field. Now, one has to know that population economics was not established. Communication issues were there with demographers, sociologists, and so on. So Gary Becker has written a few articles, and Jakob Minzer and others, but utility maximization and children, that was something which was unthinkable, not only from other sciences, but also within economics. And in Germany, nobody was thinking that population economics would be something of relevance to look at. Also, it was clear at the time that the demography situation we face nowadays, which were visible already at that time and discussed at that time, then soon were so relevant for society. Now that was all leading us to the idea that we should create a society like the European Economic Association, a little bit smaller. It was later called European Society for Population Economics. And also there was a Journal of Population Economics, which we created. And it was Werner Müller of Springer Verlag who convinced me that we should do this journal. And he gave us the chance to start the whole thing. So that's him. He's sitting in the audience, has already said hi. And well, this is the early version of the journal. So, well, nowadays we have more people, and they are listed here. Most of them, all of them more or less, are already appeared and show in this conference. And you will know that we claim to be the leading journal nowadays in population economics. At that time, when we were creating it, there was nothing comparable, but nowadays there are a number of competitors. We welcome competitors not only because competition is always good, but also it creates a larger market and also helps us. So I'm not, we are not problematic. We see nothing problematic here. Now, a quick some numbers, and maybe we will hear later on from Mrs. Bihn more about these numbers, similar numbers. Well, the numbers of submissions have risen a lot over the years, and you see that in recent years, the submissions have even exploded. Don't think we are on decline in 2022, the last number. Well, if the year is over, we will be a little bit around the level of last year. And we are quite happy that we are not exploding. We could handle that. Now, originally, it was largely Europe and the United States submitting, but you see on the right-hand side that nowadays Asia and the Middle East has heavily grown and is now even more relevant for the journal than the United States, where still, of course, the relevant or a very relevant market is. Well, recently, days to first decision have improved a lot, in particular, since we are more actively do the desk rejection policy upon submissions. So about 2/3 of the submissions are desk rejected to focus on what we really can publish, which is not so much. Well, the acceptance numbers is always difficult to judge, in particular at a time where what is submission, well, what means the publication has changed. Published here means included in an issue. Until recently, that was a relevant criteria, but now, as you know, this has changed with the impact factors in particular, that now published online is the relevant criterion. But just as a comparison, you should know that we far below 10%, we more in the range of 5%. If you look at a decent definition, let's say the number of accepted papers divided by the number of total decisions is about 5.9% for this year. Now, the impact factor recently has risen quite a lot. We are in a very strong position now with 4.7 for 2021, and the same is to do with the side score, which is also significantly improved. We have made big step upward in the rankings among economics journals and in demography journals, and I think we will make any effort we can to stay in that region, which is certainly a very challenging issue. But I have to be grateful to all the other editors and all our referees, and of course the authors who are willing to work hard to get a good paper published in the journal. Well, with this, I would like to stop here and thank you all for listening so far. And maybe stop sharing here and handle over to the next speaker, Martina B, I guess, if Michaella allows us.
Yes, please. I'm very happy if Martina takes over. Thank you very much, Klaus. For those of you in the audience who don't know her, Martina Bihn has been with the journal for quite a long time, representing, of course, in her role as publishing director of journals Business, Economics, and Statistics at Springer Nature. And she's going to be reflecting a little bit on the nature of the journal within the bigger Springer ecosystem. So please, Martina, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Michaella. I would like to share my screen. I cannot see it myself, but I hope you can see it already. Great. Yes. Then I'll go from there. Yeah. Let me see if I can move also. Yes, that helps. Do you see the next slide? First slide after the start slide, then I can start from here. Great. Yeah, the Journal of Population Economics, 35 years of Journal of Population Economics. That's also 35 years of thought leadership. And now I'm going back to this foundation year of 1988 that Klaus Zimmermann already spoke about, showing what the journal looked like in the very beginning. And I think that if I'd known that Werner Müller would be here today, I'd say it would have been up to him to speak about it, because it was the time when he accompanied this process of creating a new journal. You can see from this little extract from the editorial that Klaus Zimmermann wrote at that time in that very first issue of the journal, that this was an entirely new journal in a rather new field. So it was, as he wrote here, fascinating, new and promising field. That was 35 years ago. And we can say this way of the journal was a very straightforward journey over 35 years. A lot of things have developed, but the journal has followed this way because it was so modern and it was so far-sighted when it was started 35 years ago. We've already heard about the many volumes, 35 volumes, 140 issues, almost 1,500 articles that were published. The constant element here is the editor-in-chief. It's Klaus Zimmermann who created the journal in cooperation with my former boss, Werner Müller, who drove the development, who developed the journal together with all of the editors, the board members, and kept it one of the really and made it even more important from year to year, kept this straightforward way for the journal. We can say that the usage growth that we have at this journal is really amazing. We expect this year to publish 450,000 articles. That must be great. We expect to have 450,000 full text downloads of the articles published in the journal by the end of this year. And you can see the development in this blue graph. And on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, we can see that we're also following a modern development in business model, because open access is becoming more and more important for journal publishing. And we've now reached this year so far a percentage of 57% of articles in the journal being published with open access. Without any doubt, this is also contributing to the strong increase in downloads and usage that we see at the journal. You've already seen this impact factor trend picture, so I don't need to comment on that one anymore. We have an H index of 75, and the Scopus metrics reveal that the journal is in quartile 1 in both categories, demography and economics. This is very, very successful across all the different metrics and indexing services. The journal has reached a standing that is really very important. That shows how influential the content is that is published in the journal. And here I would like to refer to a model that has become more and more important over the last few years, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. This journal, from the start, reflected something that today is seen as one of the most important constructions for science, because this is about finding solutions for today's societal challenges. The SDGs are so important nowadays, and this journal anticipated it. This journal had all these different disciplines connected from the start and looked into, and is still looking into, very important topics. When we look at the SDGs and we compare to the titles of articles, and I put up here on screen some of the articles that each of them had more than 10,000 downloads. When we look at the titles and compare, we see that all these important topics, be it poverty, well-being, growth, work conditions, equality and inequality, these topics that are now put forward and are recognized by everyone. That was very early on the journal, still on the journal, and makes the journal very influential, very important, and a great success. And this is, yeah, I can only congratulate the journal and each of you. And we are really very, very thankful to you for making this possible from the start till today, with this success story that is so extraordinary. It puts the journal at the center of what we do at Springer Nature, because the SDGs take a very important part in what we develop as a publisher. So we're very, very happy to be together with all of you on this project. And we wish the journal to grow further. We've heard a lot about being very sustainable in the development of papers. It has a super high rejection rate, but there will be more research in the area. The field is growing, all these fields are growing, and I hope we can go on like this and at the same time grow the journal further, because I think this is a wonderful area in which you work, and the society is waiting for your results to be implemented. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martina. And thank you also for being a big contributor to our ability to grow and to be sustainable. I think that we definitely owe the Springer support system an enormous thanks. And I think that actually gives us a nice opportunity to ask perhaps Werner Müller to say something. I think that it's really nice that we have this history that's in the digital room with us.
Yeah, hello.
Can I ask one you two? Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And well, I'm impressed by the development of the journal in the last years. I didn't follow this very closely when I left the company. But yeah, if I see the impact factor, if I see the number of published articles, I'm really impressed that the journal, yeah, grew and developed further also after my time. Martina Bihn has already, my former colleague has already, told you about the present situation. So what I can only say is about the history long ago. When I joined Springer, Springer was already an international publisher, but more known in medicine and mathematics. The economics program was very small, was mainly German. And I was thinking, what to do in order to grow this program. And I looked at Elsevier and I looked at the university presses, and I was always impressed by those views. So I was also thinking of journals, but it was at the beginning it was difficult to start new journals, because we didn't have the reputation in business and economics. So it took some time. I started my first journal in 1984. Then we took over a small publisher in Germany, and they had some international journals. But Journal of Population Economics was my second journal I started. And it was a very good possibility, because Professor Zimmermann was in Mannheim and I was located in Heidelberg. And as he already told us, he had published a book with me. And so we decided to start the journal. And I was very happy from the beginning with the development. And also this journal helped me then to get to internationalize the Springer program, and in this way also to get other new journals and other new possibilities. So it was a very important step in the development of Springer Verlag's business and economics program, and I'm still very thankful that we did this in the middle of the 80s.
Thank you very much, Mr. Müller, and I'm happy again that you found the possibility to join us here today. Back to Michaella.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the reflection of the three of you actually on the history of the journal, and also a little bit on its history. Of course, in the journal, we're very lucky to be able to publish different kinds of research, much of which is very innovative, very topical. And every year, we're able to award the Kuznets Prize, which is an annual prize that's issued by the journal for the best paper that has been published within the last year. In the last year, we were very fortunate to award the prize to Anisha Sharma and her colleague Garima Rastogi. And we're now fortunate to have the prize presented during this session by Ashwini Deshpande, who comes from Ashoka University. Ashwini is a professor of economics and the founding director of the Center for Economic Data and Analysis. Much of her own work has addressed very close thematic issues to the heart of the journal, namely issues around inequality, poverty, gender. And these are also topics that really resonate with the Kuznets Prize-winning paper. So if I could please pass over to Ashwini to lead us through the prize-winning session, I would be much appreciative.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted to be present here and to be asked to say a few words on this amazing achievement that my colleague Anisha Sharma and Garima Rastogi, who was a former student at Ashoka University, who I didn't have the pleasure of knowing then, but have heard great things about. That the two of them, their paper has won this very prestigious award. I didn't know that it was 35 years of the Journal of Population Economics, so that makes it especially sweet and especially special. Anisha is a very dear and valuable colleague who also helped set up the Center for Economic Data and Analysis. And now we are actually collaborating on a large-scale project to find solutions to women's economic empowerment in India. So that's a new research agenda, again, very, very similar to the themes that the Journal of Population Economics has been publishing. just a few words about why this paper is so important and the context that in which this paper presents the research. So India is, South Asia actually, is known as this classic belt of patriarchy, and it's seen as a place where social norms really haven't changed over the decades. But actually, when you see the indicators, there has been progress on several of the indicators of women. But the one thing that hasn't really changed is a very strong son preference. So Amartya Sen, of course, brought this issue to light by talking about India's missing women, which was parents resorting to sex-selective abortions and making sure that girl children weren't allowed to be born. Now, in 1994, at the All India level, there was a law that got passed which banned sex-selective abortions. Of course, illegally they continued, and if you were richer, there were ways of getting around it. But so the one big question that this paper investigates is, was this ban even effective in curbing the sex-selective abortions? And the answer to that is yes, it was. But while it curbed female feticide, what ended up happening was that it inadvertently resulted in a phenomenon which is known as unwanted daughters, which is parents trying for a boy, but getting a girl instead. And these are parents who obviously are either don't have the resources for sex-selective abortion, or perhaps don't even want to abort. But they do have a strong son preference. So they kept trying for a boy, but ended up often with girls. And this gave rise to this whole phenomenon of unwanted girls, so much so, and it's so pervasive, that Indian languages actually have terms to describe unwanted girls. So in Bengal, for example, many girls are called Arna, which means no more, that they don't want another girl. In my own language, in Marathi, there is also a word that describes unwanted girls, which is so. And in China, I believe also in Mandarin, there is a word that describes unwanted girl, which says with some things like Dai Di, which is first term means bring along, and the second term means a younger brother. So no more girls, basically. So it resulted in this phenomenon of unwanted girls. And what Anisha and Garima's paper shows is that these girls, while they got born, they suffered discrimination or neglect in other arenas of their life. And one of the big consequences was the amount of education that they received, particularly when compared to their brothers. And so what you find here is actually a proof of a theory which is called resource concentration hypothesis, which basically means that parents concentrate their investments and resources onto the child that is most likely to succeed. And in a patriarchal society like India, that child happens to be the boy that gets born. And so this very strong son preference continues to be that one gender norm that hasn't actually shifted that much. And so even though many of women's indicators have shown a remarkable improvement, and even actually sex ratios at birth has shown an improvement precisely because of this ban on abortions, but the relative neglect of the girl child exhibited, for example, in this case in education, results in other kinds of adverse consequences. It's a very carefully done paper. It's written very lucidly, so it's not heavy to read, and it's just the kind of it's the best kind of an empirical paper, which is careful, it's rigorous, and it's a pleasure to read. And of course, it adds immense value in terms of our understanding of different facets of gender discrimination. It also points to the fact that a particular policy might work in one dimension, but it could have adverse unintentional consequences in other dimensions. So these are all choices. These are all sort of the complexities of economic development that we need to be aware of. So with these words, let me just congratulate Anisha and Garima again. I'm confident that this is just the first milestone in what I think promises to be an illustrious research career. So I wish them all the best and congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these words of reflection. Also, of course, knowing the context better than many of the rest of us do in this setting. Thank you so much for putting us in this kind of relative view. I would also very much so like to thank and to congratulate our prize winners for something that is absolutely a meaningful illustration, a case study of the complexities of translating research and science into policy that is responsible and responsive. Anisha and Garima, do you have immediate reflections or comments?
I just want to say thank you very much to all of the editors of the Journal of Population Economics, especially Professor Zimmermann, for giving this paper such a wonderful home, for helping us make it better. And honestly, the fact that it has been picked for this honor is just the icing on the cake. It's very, very validating and motivating to be recognized by your senior colleagues in the field. And so it really does feel great. So thank you so much for that. A very big thank you to Ashwini as well for taking time out from her super busy schedule to say such kind words about this paper. This was actually my first time working with a student, which was kind of daunting, but also amazingly rewarding. And also I feel like Garima has set the standard extremely high for any future work that I will be doing with students, that I hope to be doing with students. As Ashwini said, we're collaborating on this really big project of trying to understand the root of gender discrimination in India, and really thinking hard about what effective policy looks like in terms of addressing that. And so I hope that that I can bring many more such projects and papers to you in the future. Thank you so much.
Yes, I would also like to thank the editors at the journal. Thank you so much for all the feedback that we got, as well as the recognition that we're getting now through this prestigious award. I also want to thank Anisha. Thank you so much for being such a great mentor throughout this process. And Dr. Deshpande for your kind words about our paper, as well as just really setting the scene for why it could be relevant in policy. And I also want to thank the rest of the economics faculty at Ashoka University, some of whom are on the call. And it's just great to see that that relationship with Ashoka still continues throughout my journey. And also finally, I'd like to thank my friends and family for their support. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It was also from my side a pleasure to work with you because, well, you revealed it already. I was also the responsible editor in this case. I only take a part of all the submissions because we have so many other competent editors. But it was, yeah, a journey which took some time, but it was the usual journey which we have to accept in a journal of the quality we want to be. And I think I should say that I knew that at the beginning it was, there were some, referees had some remarks, but it took, you took up the challenge and you came back with a very, very good revision. And so at the end, we're all very, very impressed by the output we got. And if we look, for instance, at the number of downloads, citations we don't know yet, but the number of downloads, it's already a very, very respectable amount of downloads the paper already has. It wasn't published long ago. Yes, it was just recently online, and we are expecting more. Now, this is also, I should stress that, an issue of the many issues the journal wants to stand for. I mean, challenges like the boy preference or gender preference, or also abortion issues around the globe, not only in India. These are challenging issues everywhere, from the United States up to whatever, Germany or whatever, just to mention other countries. There are challenges in various different ways. But we as researchers who are concerned about the fate of society and where we are going are are anxious to deal with relevant issues. And this journal certainly wants to receive and publish more papers on the topic. And you may have seen that we have already in this year, but also in previous years, published a number of respectable articles on this topic. Now, when I may ask, I'm not want to create a big round of discussion, but what brought you to choose this type of topic for your research, and what brought you to the Journal of Population Economics?
I think I can maybe start with that answer, but it honestly just started with a conversation with Professor Sharma, who was my professor at the time, and we were just talking about sex ratios and how important they are in the Indian context, but not much has been written about what happens after the child is born. A lot of research is on the sex ratios themselves or early childhood development, but not much beyond health or nutrition. And we were doing a lot of work on education at the time, and it seemed like a really important question that there was not an answer to at that time. And the Journal of Population Economics seemed like the best place for this paper to be, because it really is about both population growth, but biased population growth and the way that society changes over time.
Thank you. Anisha, you want to add something or not?
Yeah, I mean, just while kind of reading more on the subject, we just ended up finding so many papers, as you've already mentioned, that were already carried by the journal. You know, so it kind of made sense to think seriously about this journal as a home for our paper. I think I think Garima is absolutely right. This kind of discussion about fixing sex ratios has to some extent come at the cost of thinking about what the fundamental drivers of son preference are, and in some sense the focus has been on these top-down policy efforts, which are kind of typical of government in these contexts to try and fix the problem. And I'm not saying they're bad ideas, they're very important and have great value in terms of just increasing the number of female births, but thinking more broadly about where these social norms come from and how to shift them. I mean, that's much more challenging, but also I think more important from a policy perspective. So that's something that did interest us about this particular subject.
Okay, thank you. I think we typically, if we would be in a room, we would now handle over the prize award certificate. We have already sent it to you, as you know, of course. So you have it in on your files. I could now post it here, but we have the time to do so. let's perhaps try to show it. When I show the screen again, let's see whether I can manage that thing. The question is, where would it be? It must be this. So that's how it looks. It looks, if you can see that, yes, it looks rather innocent, but it looks as it has to look, and I'm happy that we can provide it to you. Okay, so I think that's the end of, I guess, Michaella. We still have some time. There is somebody wants to say something.
I think it's actually somebody applauding. So congratulations, colleagues, that you're inspiring enough that you get digital applause.
Okay, yes. Maybe we do this all. Okay, congratulations.
And please, Klaus, go ahead. We do still have some room in the schedule for discussion, so please.
Yes, so basically we have 10 minutes. It's always difficult to plan these meetings. If you click, we could either make a break now, that's one thing. The other thing is if there are questions in the audience on journal policy or publications, whatever, this is a chance now to ask the question. I can also talk a little bit about how we work. I mean, maybe I do this first. That was, so to speak, on my last slide in my presentation anyway. The issue is, yeah, I could even go, well, I'm just talking how it works. Now, in principle, yes, we are, as you have seen, we are a number of editors, 8 editors and 1 editor-in-chief. We receive very many submissions these days for a journal like this. So about 800, we have to calculate 700, 800 submissions per year. That is not doable if we would, as in the first years, yes, we would look into all articles through a refereeing process. We typically have 2 to 3, normally 3 referees, sometimes even more if it's needed. And if you multiply each article by submitted article by this number, then you get so many referees which you will not find. Yes, experts reporting in time and so on, chasing and so on. That's why. Also, I mean, if you can just publish 40 papers as we did in the past years, out of 800 or so, yes, I mean, come on. I mean, why would one has to the effort? We cannot make our papers better. This is not our job. We have to publish good journal. And often, I mean, the issue is not necessarily, is this not a decent paper which can be published? Most of the papers we cannot publish, can be published somewhere, but either it's not the right focus or it's also maybe not innovative for a top field journal. Yes, that's the point one has to judge. And that is often seen right away. Yes, if it's not ready, sometimes papers also think, well, referees write the paper anyway. Why should they see good first draft? Well, that's a mistake, at least with us. So we cannot, if we cannot do that thing, we expect that you think it's published right away. However, none of the papers we are getting will be immediately accepted. All go through refereeing and revisions. So that's why desk rejection policies are the relevant ones done by most journals, and it's good. I mean, and to be honest, I'm also an author and I submit also articles to other journals, and I also get desk rejected eventually if I, for whatever reasons, haven't chosen the right outlet, and that's not always easy. And it's better this way. I can go on faster, and that's exactly what is the message. Now, then it goes to the editors when it has passed my desk. So basically, I decide on desk rejections first. Then it goes to the qualified editors who have certain fields, and they also have the right to desk reject. This is sometimes there's a paper where I say, well, this has a potential, but I'm not an expert enough in this subfield to really judge this. So that's why it goes to the editor, and then the editor can desk reject also. And only then, after the editor sends the rest of the articles out to referees. And as I said, there are a few revisions going on. And well, if there are rejections, then Springer, as all other publishers, also have now the transfer desk policy that is not always seen by editors of all journals for all publishers as the best invention, but it's a good idea basically to help people who are rejected to find another outlet. Yes, of course, the finding of the outlet is difficult. If you get such a letter, you should inspect it and carefully evaluate it, but also be cautious. Not all the suggestions you get are well chosen because it's so difficult to do it. And I got these suggestions also a number of times, and not always I found all suggestions valuable. So that's a difficult thing. Finding the right journal in this universe of journals out there is not easy, and those who are not chasing for the top journals and facing numbers of submissions, rejections and submissions in the career of an article. Who goes to other journals will have to be cautious nowadays to find out whether these are good, decent journals. And a publisher like Springer, Nature cannot afford to have a not respectable journal. So that's certainly one indication to go with a good publisher. Okay, so these are kind of remarks. So if there are any questions at this stage from the audience, which I or some of my editors who are sitting here also can answer. Michaella, you haven't seen anybody and there's nothing in the chat. Well, maybe we can then handle over, I mean, to Oded and let Oded Galor, who can handle this talk a bit at the beginning, what he plans to do, I would suggest. Yes, Werner Müller, thank you very much. Bye-bye. It was great to have you here.
Okay, so I suppose that we're starting the next session at around 3 o'clock, right? So we do have additional 6 minutes, and we will wait for the panelists to emerge and to surface gradually. So the question is, how do we want to spend the next 6 minutes? Any thoughts about this?
Maybe you say a bit how you want to organize it.
Yeah, so broadly speaking, we have 4 panelists and a very distinguished group of scholars. So we will have David Card, Jim Heckman, Klaus Zimmermann, and myself. And we would try to provide our perspective about the past trajectory of the field of population economics and perhaps its future trajectory. So the general division will be, I mean, each of us will have an initial period of about 10 to 15 minutes to express his thoughts, and perhaps ultimately we will have about a few minutes for each of us to reflect upon the comments of others. But naturally, each of us will draw on his own expertise. In my case, it will be the field of economic growth. In the case of Klaus, it will be the field of population economics. In the case of David Card, it will be predominantly the field of labor economics. And in the case of Jim Heckman, it will be more broader, partly perhaps health economics and partly applied microeconomics in general. But I suggest that we will simply pause for a moment and wait till everyone will surface in the coming few minutes.
There he is, David Card.
So
welcome, David.
So, Michaella, you will allow us to share the screen in the sense that both David and I would use some slides, and it will be useful to be able to share the screens on our end.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. You should all have permission to share your screens.
Okay.
And welcome, David. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, or what I guess is your very early morning.
Yeah, 6 in the morning, yeah.
My God, yes. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sergio. Hi, Klaus.
Hi, Sergio.
Okay, so it is 3 o'clock and let's begin. So I'm delighted to open this important session, reflecting on our views about the trajectory of the field of population economics. Part of this discussion will be based on the centrality of the field of population economics in understanding other phenomena, and part of it perhaps will be devoted to reflections about the importance of population economics in the understanding of the future trajectory of various disciplines in economics and elsewhere. So we're delighted to have with us very distinguished scholars, starting with David Card. Ultimately, we will be joined with Jim Heckman, Klaus Zimmermann, and myself. Given the short time frame that we have, I will shorten my introduction and I will transfer the helm directly to Professor Card, who will share with us his views about the path of population economics. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Oded. I've prepared some slides. I hope those are those visible?
We cannot hear you well.
Oh, okay. How about that? Is that better?
Not really, but I can understand if it's
How
fine.
about that? Is that doing it? Oh man. I'm sorry about that.
Am I the only one? Oded?
No, the sound volume is quite low.
I can see it well and I can hear David quite well, so perhaps we should adjust.
How about that? Let me try that.
That's good.
Okay.
That's better. Thank you.
Okay. So I prepared some slides on this topic. In thinking about the topic, I was looking around for what other people had said on this issue, and I found an interesting paper by Bernard van Praag on in the very first issue of the Journal of Population Economics. I guess he was the first president of the association, and lays out a number of issues, 8 interesting questions, and I'm going to kind of come back and talk about most of the same topics as he raised, it turns out, and try and say a little bit about what's new in each of those areas. So here's a kind of partial list of topics. In each case, I'm going to mention the topic and then try and talk a little bit about what's new in that area. So obviously, one of the first important topics in population economics is the whole issue of fertility, birth control, the fertility transition, abortion, teen pregnancy, all those kind of topics. Van Praag started his paper by with a sort of fundamental question: why do people have children? And outlined basically kind of the 3 standard motivations for people to have children in traditional and modern societies. One is a productive asset for farmers and other people. One is as a consumption good, which is pretty consistent with the sort of the Becker-Lewis type model. And of course, in a lot of societies, children are also an old age savings mechanism. So you put money in your children and then they take over the farm and support you in your old age. So what's new in this area? Well, many topics are new. I think probably the overriding new thing is the collapse in fertility in nearly all developed countries. Another topic that's, or issue that's sort of new is the rise in administrative data. And we'll see this same point raised in a lot of different areas, which has allowed a lot of detailed analysis of many old questions. A third thing that a lot of papers are looking at these days is the effects of natalist policies. An interesting one recently, a paper by these two authors, Sorbachev and Yakovlev, looks at a really big program in Russia, which provided around $10,000 per family to have children. And unlike many of the programs that have been proposed and implemented in different countries, this one seemed to have a fairly large effect. Just to talk about the collapse in fertility for a moment, these are data on the estimated number of children per woman in 9 different countries between 1970 and 2020. So I've got China, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Korea, Mexico, UK, and US. I think most people are probably aware that the general trend. You can see that in nearly all these countries, even in Mexico, fertility is 2 or less. There's a one really interesting pattern is Korea. Notice the fertility rate is less than 1 now in Korea, and dropping fast. Historically, country like China had fairly high fertility, but is now below 1. Germany, Italy have, in this period of time, have had relatively low fertility. The US was historically always something of an outlier among Western countries in having high fertility, but even there, fertility rates have dipped quite a bit in the last 10 years or so. And this is a figure from a recent paper in the Journal of Economic Perspectives by Kearney, Levine, and Pardue, which looks at the birth rate. This is not exactly the fertility rate. This is a key ingredient of the fertility rate, and show that the birth rate in the US has really dipped quite substantially from around 65, 70 per thousand in the 80s and 90s to less than 50, 55 range. And that looks like that's probably going to continue even with other things. So that's going to be a topic that attracts a lot of interest. A second topic that's historically very important in population economics is the whole issue of partnering, marriage, divorce, matching. What's new here? Well, one thing that a lot of papers have pointed out is, especially in Western economies, the rising assortativeness in matching. So the tendency for highly educated men to marry highly educated women rather than some less assertiveness. A big set of topics has to do with LGBTQ, rise in data that allows us to measure that, changes in legal framework for marriage and partnering for those and legal rights. A third issue is the decline in partnering rates. So there's been quite a few recent studies and documentation of the fact that a larger and larger fraction of older people are living alone, especially in a country like the US. And then a fourth topic, kind of overriding framework here that's been kind of helpful. There's a fairly well-developed set of theoretical models of matching, and Becker, of course, was one of the first to kind of propose the idea of thinking about the marriage market just like a simple matching market. Chu and Xiao and many subsequent papers have built on that, and I think we'll continue to see a lot of work like that in the future. A third set of topics has to do with sort of families and how they organize, especially around the topic of children. So specialization of spouses, childcare, investment in children, intergenerational investment in intergenerational transmission. Couple of new topics here. There's many new topics, but a couple of new ones that caught my eye. One is the pretty solid evidence these days that the link between specialization in household and the gender gap in labor markets is pretty well established and seems to be quite important in modern economies. Clevin et al. Being a really simple example of that. There's also increasing evidence on that the intergenerational transmission between parents and children differs across countries, differs over time, and differs even at the subnational level. So Miles Korak had put together a bunch of data on differences across countries that turned out to be quite influential in a lot of recent papers. Everyone is aware of the Chetty et al. Projects on differences in intergenerational transmission by parts of the country in the United States. And Bashma Zumder and his colleagues have done a lot of interesting papers looking at intergenerational transmission between blacks and whites and how that's changed over time and so on. This is just a couple of slides, a couple of figures from the Clevin et al. Paper showing an event study type analysis of what happens to earnings, hours, participation, and wages between men and women after the birth of the first child. And this very, very simple but compelling event study framework has really got people focused on the importance of understanding specialization as a way to understand the gender gap. The fourth topic is the effects of population size and structure. Van Praag mentioned the kind of classic question, how do different age groups substitute and complement in production? A sort of macro level question that's also always important in this area. Oded has worked a lot on is larger population good or bad? The traditional Malthusian view was larger population is bad for per capita welfare. Some modern view, once we've sort of allowed for capital accumulation, is that if anything, maybe larger population has a slight advantage. What's new here? Well, on the production side, there's a lot of potential from the availability of administrative data, a lot of interesting projects looking at generalized production functions and allowing different age groups and so on. Some particularly interesting work on kind of what happens at the firm level when a given worker, for instance, dies, Simon Yeager's work, or when a big retirement program is introduced and sweeps away a fraction of the workforce in given firms. At the more macro level, I think one of the interesting things that it hasn't really hit population economics as much, but is very important in urban economics is the obvious importance of agglomeration economies and how that is really translated into sort of a theoretical models of population size. This is a kind of a simple data graph that shows in the United States, each of these is a commute zone, which is the country's got about 700 of those. On the right, you can see the largest ones, which are like Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, places like that. And typically in most countries, there's a very strong systematic positive relationship between size and average wages. And that's true in the United States with about the same elasticity, believe it or not. Another topic that's been important in population economics and continues to be important is the general issue of migration and immigration. Van Praag really focused on the question of immigration policy. How does that work? Does it increase or change the distribution of the types of people that come to a country? In this area, I guess the historical three questions have been assimilation of immigrants, impacts on natives, and fiscal impacts. What's new? Well, one thing that's really important is that it used to be that really the immigration was a particularly US field, because the US was one of the countries that had combination of data and immigrants. Canada and Australia had immigrants, and New Zealand, but they didn't have much data. Nowadays, many European countries have more immigrants than the United States, and rising fraction. Refugees is a very important topic. Refugee flows, they've been very large and continuing. Administrative data has allowed a lot of interesting new perspectives on this, for instance, an analysis of the role of firms in the assimilation process. Very important set of questions is emerging on the importance of second generation outcomes. And finally, a fifth topic, sort of political economy of immigration is becoming almost unavoidable. Anti-immigrant policies are basically the foundation of many right-wing nativist parties, including the Trump campaign in the United States and similar parties all around Europe and other places. Just to sort of emphasize one thing that is a theme of some of the recent work, the importance of immigrants in certain occupations. So this is data from the US showing the immigrant share by education group in a bunch of science fields. Across all the STEM fields, about 20% of people with a bachelor's degree in the United States are foreign born. A third of the people with master's degree and about 30% of those with PhD. But in computer science and engineering, half of all the people with a PhD in these fields are foreign born. In economics, it's only 20%. Kind of surprising. That doesn't the PhD programs that I'm aware of would be much higher than that. But this is sort of national data. And so this, when people are talking about cutting immigration flows, you can see this is heading right into the problem of where do we get enough computer scientists and engineers, and attracting a lot of attention. This is data from PISA, the International Testing Program, showing gaps between natives and children of immigrants. So this is addressing the question of the second generation, how they're doing. And this is the test score gap. And you can see down at the bottom of some of the major European countries where there's quite a large gap, negative gap between immigrants and natives, or natives are much ahead. In Australia and Canada, immigrant children actually do better, and the US is not so different. So this is kind of showing the importance of understanding what these mechanisms are and why the second generation is so unsuccessful in some countries and relatively successful in others. Another traditional topic that's in population economics that's very important is aging and retirement. Van Praag mentioned the kind of overriding question of how do people allocate their time over the life cycle? When do they decide to stop working and so on? Inside of this topic is all the issues of Social Security, pensions, disability. What's new here? A major issue is the rapid rise in dependency ratios across countries because of low birth rates in the last 4 years. So that's changing a lot, Social Security and pension economics. There's been a lot of experimentation and innovation in disability and retirement programs, and a lot of new techniques for analyzing and understanding the impacts of those programs. So one of the most important new research designs, the so-called judges design, was really innovated by Nicole Mastis and others, looking at judges in the disability program and seeing who had a case seen in front of a harsh judge versus a easy judge, and using that as a causal inference mechanism. There's a lot of interest in healthcare and elder care. Basically, a large fraction of the population is going to end up in nursing homes, and this is an important topic. But also, with more women working and a lot of elderly people to take care of, there's another part of the burden of care, which is who looks after the grandparents and parents, and how is that handled, and somewhat related to immigration in a lot of countries. And finally, a really interesting question in this area: what do we know about the productivity effects of the aging population? If you look at different countries and look at those that have a higher fraction of older people and those that have less, it's kind of intuitively clear that looks like the young population may be good for productivity and innovation, but the research on that is a little limited. Again, Nicole Mastis and colleagues have a very interesting paper comparing innovation rates across productivity growth rates across states in the US, and showing there's a very strong connection with the fraction of elderly people. So it suggests that there is a causal effect of having more young people on productivity growth. This is the dependency ratio data from the OECD, same sources I use for fertility, same 9 countries. The dependency ratio defined by the OECD is the number of people over 65 relative to the number of people aged 25 to 64. And you can see this is projected data for ahead to 2050. You can see in all these countries that number is rising quickly. It's rising to a rate around 40 or 50 in many countries, even including the US. So it means that there's going to be a relatively high fraction of people who have to be supported in their older age relative to the number of workers, which is going to stress out the pension systems unless we find some way to keep all the old people working. And finally, the last topic that I want to mention is mortality. This is also a historically very important topic in demography and population economics. Trends in death rates, estimation, and synthetic methods of constructing longevity estimates, diseases and pandemics. What's new? Well, one thing really important is Angus Deaton and Case's work on deaths of despair, documenting the historical turnaround in the trend in mortality, especially for the white population in the US. Rising SES gaps in longevity. There's really strong evidence that longevity gaps are widening in the US and across different groups, educating groups in particular, and also race groups. Obviously, the COVID pandemic is providing a lot of important new data and evidence on the long run and short run effects of disease. And then there's just a huge number of new studies every day, practically, on sort of epidemiological issues like prenatal stress, exposure to pollution, how that affects early exposure to pollution in the womb, how that affects longevity, and so on. This is a really incredibly important new area. So that's a kind of a brief, quick survey of some of the topics, and I look forward to hearing what the other panelists say. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, David, for this broad and extensive overview of the developments in the field of population economics and its implications for the future trajectories of other disciplines. We are delighted to have with us Jim Heckman, who is joining us from Jamaica, and will have a relatively short time with us. And I would, without further ado, I would like to transfer the helm to Jim. Please, Jim.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm sorry, there was a real confusion here on my part about the time zones. I'm at a conference here in Montego Bay, and I'm looking out over the ocean. It's very beautiful. There's also a conference going on downstairs where I am, looking at an agenda for trying to go forward with scaling up certain classes of early childhood intervention programs. So nonetheless, I'm really delighted to be able to be here. And I want to be able to congratulate two people on this call. The first will be Klaus, of course, who founded the journal, whose anniversary we're celebrating in this conference. And I really honestly think that he deserves a great deal of applause and credit for putting together a journal that has held course steadfastly in raising a number of important questions and addressing them at a theoretical and empirical level. David's study survey was very nice and providing an overview of what the journal has published in the last 35 years. And I just want to go forward with that and talk about what might be next. But Klaus deserves an enormous amount of attention and credit. And meanwhile, Oded does as well. I gather your book is being launched also at this conference. Is that right? These are one of these great books that have this quality of very comprehensive and in the sense of really thinking about the big picture, which I think is a major advance really over what current thinking is in a lot of areas of economics. There's been a lot of thinking that, the best way to go forward is kind of a miniaturist point of view. And there's value, and the devil is in the details, no question about it. But the insight is in the bigger picture. And I think we need these models. So it's the synthesis of both the bigger picture and those details that really make economics advance. And I think the Journal of Population Economics has played a very important role in actually advancing the subject this way and essentially thinking strongly about the underlying field of population economics. So David has set the agenda in more or less of what some of the current problems are, what people are working on. In some sense, what's hot and what's not. But what I want to do is step back a little bit from that and think about the role. And Oded has really pioneered this in a very important ways, and Klaus as well. And there are many others. Becker was already mentioned. We can go back to people like Mincer and Becker and the whole field of population economics. I'm not sure, maybe we shouldn't start with Malthus. I think Oded at least be willing to start with Malthus. But I think what we want to think about strongly is the underlying models, the ways that we put together the data, we interpret the data, and then we think about economic policy. That was Malthus's goal. Malthus really truly wanted to understand what to do and what the society would do and what the consequences would be of population growth. And we still have that question today. For example, a Malthusian type problem, which is prevalent in the whole discussion right now, is the question about why China's fertility rate fell so dramatically. The obvious question is the one-child policy. People said, oh, one-child policy, there must be some decline in the one-child policy. The one-child policy caused the decline because of the penalty. And yet when people look very closely, not only at China, but all of East Asia, starting with Japan in the 1940s and Taiwan and Korea and so forth, one begins to understand that fundamental economic forces, creating greater opportunities for women, creating more education in particular for women, and essentially in providing opportunity costs for parents to stay at home and raise kids as opposed to go to work and produce in the market. So those fundamental economic trade-offs have played a role that we're now beginning to fully appreciate. Studies are coming out that really make this kind of crude policy analysis much richer, and maybe we can understand much better the nature of policy. You know, a lot of work by Saligny and Bourguignon and many others about the impact of some of the French fertility policies have shown those can promote fertility, but also they can retard fertility. And so when looking at fertility in Eastern Europe in the 1950s, even when below replacement rate populations were in existence in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary, and Romania, we saw that the consequences of low wages, tight housing restrictions, and a number of other factors caused people not to have fertility. So going forward, this fertility question, and after all, population is in the journal's title. These questions about supply more generally, population, labor supply, are really fundamental. And I think the way that we're going to tackle these problems going forward is good data is always very nice. We got to be really careful. There's kind of a movement out there that says that, you know, we don't really need big data is always better. More data is better in the sense of just more of the same. And we know that's not true. Administrative data is great, but it's got a lot of limitations. It doesn't give us a lot of information about fertility, and it doesn't give us a lot of information about family background. And it doesn't give us a lot of information about the structure of incentives facing the family, work histories, and the like. And so the real path forward is combining these two. And there are a lot of creative attempts to do so, but creating with the theoretical umbrella, a life cycle fertility model or life cycle set of fertility models that allow us to think broadly about fertility and labor supply and looking at what the true incentives are in various public policies. So we can go beyond this kind of treatment control comparison, which has dominated a lot of the discussion, and move to real understanding. So I'll give you a recent example that came up. There was a big debate in the United States about the child tax care credit. And many people were saying, okay, you know, there's even, I think this is a great example of what I'm trying to talk about. The whole issue about child tax care credit has been motivated by this desire to essentially address child poverty. And many people point to the fact that child poverty is prevalent and we have a very bad problem, we do something about it. However, there are two aspects to keep in mind, and this is really important. And this comes right to the issue of measurement that David was talking about, and the use of and misuse of, I would also say, administrative data. When you look at the poverty rate that's published in the United States, there's been a lot of work done recently by some of my colleagues at Chicago, Bruce Meyer, Outen and Splinter, and many others that contest these official policy, the official statements about poverty and social mobility. When looking deeply into these questions, when we look closely at what the real transfers are that individuals get, what incentives they face, what the changes are in the basket of goods they can buy, what the true cost of living really is. The official poverty rate for the country in the United States, which is listed around 15%, falls to down 1%. Now that's a strong decline and it's very debated, but it's a topic of central importance because even if it's only half that way, the whole discussion in a lot of the US policy has been based on statistics that exclude huge amounts of the transfer system that help people in poverty. And so we exclude big components of EITC, a lot of transfer programs that aren't counted by the census or some of the official records. And therefore, what we've come is to have a deeper understanding of what the problems really are. And so I was a little bit horrified recently in light of some of these new findings that are really pretty rock solid, I think. They're pretty well established, showing that, in fact, we're mismeasuring poverty badly, that people are proposing a whole new round of poverty programs, alleviation problems, trillions more dollars in the US, based essentially on the structure of these statistics, which are heavily flawed. So that's one issue. I think that, yes, administrative data, yes, data, yes, getting cleaner. It's one of the great revolutions that occurred from the time that Mincer and Becker were writing 60, 70 years ago to now. We have many better data sources. And we're still in the process of integrating those. And I think that's a real challenge. But the second is really understanding labor supply and incentives. And this is something that's kind of fallen out of the map. And if you adopt this kind of treatment control methodology, you kind of lose the ability to think about income and substitution effects and to understand more deeply the incentives embedded in social programs, not only for fertility, but for labor supply, for migration, for a number of other areas of research. And I think really, and Oded has really pioneered in this. He's always using very good economic models and thinking in the big picture. But I think it really came to light when talking about the fact that we have this great resignation going on. And there are people, I've heard them, I've heard a number of seminars recently where people just seem mystified. Oh, how is it that so few people are going to work these days? And how come so few people are resigning? And especially a lot of young women are not participating. And why is that? And yet, you know, the link directly to the incentives and labor supply programs has not been yet sufficiently exploited. Very simplistic answers, you know, the treatment control, so-called difference and differences scheme, where you basically naively take a period at one time, compare it to another, and claim that it's a causal effect. But really understanding what the incentives are. Why has the labor force participation rate gone down? At the same time, the participation of large-scale social programs like Social Security, disability, and many other programs has gone up. So I think this is the kind of agenda. I'm only listing a few problems. I probably ran out of time already. Oded, you can rule me off the platform whenever you want. But I'm excited by the fact that the Journal of Population Economics is going forward. I'm excited that Klaus and that Oded are really guiding the journal going forward. And I would just urge that we think about these issues in a somewhat broader way, but within the context of economics. It is the Journal of Population Economics, not the Journal of Demography. And I think that's really important, that we try to understand more deeply and go in more deeply to the incentives questions. There's been so much emphasis placed on getting the right methodology, but not to the right interpretation, not looking what a true causal interpretation is, a mechanism interpretation. It's not a treatment effect like aspirin or some kind of intervention. And so I think that's really something that I hope the journal goes forward will encourage this synthesis of economics, good data analysis, and careful policy analysis. Because right now, in many countries of the world, there's a whole issue about supply. You know, supply, you know, I was in Denmark recently, and one of the big questions there is that, you know, the issue of how do you get labor supply? And, you know, labor supply is falling, partly because fertility is falling, the incentives to work are declining in some areas. And so we really need to think more broadly about what labor force is, what are the incentives, and how we integrate not only policy, but labor market incentives and put together in these more macro, more economically motivated models of the labor market. So with that, I will give my best wishes to both the editor and the president, or I guess the reigning managing editor, the founding editor and the managing editor, for putting together so many successful issues of the journal. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is really wonderful, and I couldn't agree more about the importance of thinking about the mechanisms, about incentives, and about the economics behind demographic forces. I would like, in fact, to take at the moment the space for myself and to devote my discussion to the macro perspective, if you wish, of population economics, namely the importance and the centrality of population economics in the understanding of the transition from stagnation to growth, first, and in the understanding of much of the inequality that we see across nations. So let me try to share my screen with you. Okay. So when we think about the journey of humanity, namely the evolution of human society since the emergence of Homo sapiens in Africa nearly 300,000 years ago, two fundamental mysteries are surrounding this journey. And both of them are intimately linked to population forces. The first one can be defined as the mystery of growth, namely, what are the roots of this dramatic transformation in living standards in the past few centuries after hundreds of thousands of years of stagnation? And the second one is the mystery of inequality, namely, what is the origin of this vast inequality in the wealth of nations? Why some countries are rich and others are poor? Now, it is important to note that over most of human existence, human life to a large extent was nasty, brutish, and short. In fact, it was remarkably similar to that of other species on planet Earth. Humans were preoccupied by survival and reproduction. Living standards were very close to the subsistence level, and there were minor differences in living conditions across time and across space. In fact, only a few centuries ago, 1/4 of newborn did not reach their first birthday, and 1/2 of them did not reach their reproductive age. Large number of women perished during childbirth. Life expectancy fluctuated in a very narrow range of 25 to 40 and rarely exceeded 40. And perhaps more strikingly, an economic crisis did not lead into belt tightening, but rather to mass starvation and extinction. And then in the past 2 centuries, we see this incredible metamorphosis. We see this dramatic transformation in living standards within and across societies. World income per capita has increased 14-fold. Life expectancy has more than doubled. An enormous divergence in income per capita started to take place across regions and countries in the world. Now, in contrast to the conventional wisdom, living standard has not increased monotonically in the course of human history. In fact, technological progress accelerated gradually over time, but it contributed mostly to the expansion of world population and had negligible impact on living standards over most of human history. And the recent rise in the standard of living reflects a phase transition, namely an abrupt transformation that occurred once a tipping point has been reached. So if we think about the evolution of income per capita in the past 2,000 years, it is quite striking to note that over most of human existence, income per capita is fluctuating nearly trendously till the eve of industrialization. And then in the course of industrialization, we see this dramatic eruption in income per capita, a 14-fold increase in the world as a whole. But in fact, this increase is not occurring at the same time period across the globe. Some societies are taking off as early as the beginning of the 19th century, perhaps even earlier, other societies only very recently. And since this takeoff is associated with a 14-fold increase in income per capita, an enormous divergence is created across the globe. As a result of it, much of the inequality that we see across the namely forces that led into the differential transition from stagnation to growth across the globe. So naturally, if we would like to resolve these two fundamental mysteries, and as you will see momentarily, the resolution is intimately linked to demographic, a transition from stagnation to growth in the globe as a whole, we will have to understand the origins of this differential timing of that transition across the globe, and we will have to have a better understanding of the role of historical and prehistorical factors in this process of development. And naturally, the resolution of these mysteries will equip us with tools to design policies and strategies that could mitigate inequality across the globe. Now, when you think about the process of development can be divided into 3 fundamental phases. The Malthusian epoch is driven by strong population forces, the post-Malthusian regime, and the modern growth regime. Now, the Malthusian epoch originates with the emergence of anatomically modern human in Africa nearly 300,000, and it spans 99.9% of human existence. And this is a period of interesting dualism. On the one hand, stagnation in income per capita, but on the other hand, great dynamism in the context of population and human adaptation. And it is this dynamism that ultimately is from the Malthusian, permit a transition to the post-Malthusian regime, and ultimately the Malthusian epoch, as I said, the Malthusian epoch is characterized by this fascinating dualism, stagnation along with dynamism. There is stagnation in living standards, namely income per capita fluctuated for a long period of time near the subsistence level, and life expectancy fluctuated in a narrow range of 25 to 40. But at the same time, there is dynamism in technology, dynamism in population, and dynamism in human adaptation. At any point in time, this dynamism is relatively slow and in terms of pace. Technological progress 300,000 years ago takes place at a very, very slow pace. But nevertheless, over a 300,000 year period, we move from stone tool technology to steam engine technology in the eve of industrialization. If you think about the size of the population of planet Earth, despite the Malthusian epoch, from the eve of the agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago to the midst of industrialization, the size of the population in planet Earth increases 400-fold, from 2.5 million to nearly 1 billion. And at the same time, there is great adaptation. And it is this Malthusian dynamism that ultimately triggers the transition from stagnation to growth. So as I said, during this time period, during the Malthusian epoch, technological progress is generating an increase in income per capita only in the short run. Ultimately, it permits greater population growth, mortality decline, fertility increases, and as a result of it, income per capita inevitably reverts back to the previous equilibrium position. Consequently, quite striking, logically advanced societies or land-rich economies had higher population density, but very similar levels of income per capita. This is striking.
Oded, it seems we have lost you.
Can you hear me again?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so as I said, if you look at the relationship between soil suitability and population density, which is a good measure of productivity in the pre-industrial period, we see this striking positive association, which is not surprising in the sense that we wouldn't expect less productive countries in terms of land suitability to have higher population density. But the striking element is that land productivity is not converted into higher income per capita. Namely, technological progress and higher suitability of land is converted into more people rather than richer people. At the same time, we see this great adaptation of the human population. The Malthusian pressure affected not only the size of the population, but the composition of the population, and consequently traits, whether they're cultural or individual, that were complementary to the growth process, generated higher income and consequently higher productive success in the Malthusian epoch, and they became more and more prevalent in the population. And consequently, adaptation raise the prevalence of complementary traits for the growth process, and reinforce the process of development and the ultimate takeoff from stagnation to growth. So during the Malthusian epoch, we see the operation of the wheels of change. Namely, it is the size of the population and the composition of the population, demographic forces, that affects technological progress, but in turn, technological progress affects the size and the composition of the human population. And these wheels of change are rotating in the course of human evolution, up to a point in which technological acceleration inevitably reaches a critical threshold. Beyond this critical threshold, individuals must start to invest in human capital so as to cope with this rapidly changing technological environment. But parents to invest in the education of their children without economizing in the number of children. So we see that, in fact, human capital formation is triggering a reduction in fertility, vanishes the growth process, counterbalancing population, and consequently, technological progress, human capital formation, and the decline in population growth are permitting the movement into the sustained growth regime. This can be illustrated very nicely in this chart. There are three wheels of change: the size of the population, the composition of the population, namely elements that are related to what we define as population economics or demographic forces, and technological progress. Humanity starts in Africa 300,000 years ago. The size of the human population is very modest, but nevertheless, this is a time period in which, unlike other species, humans are equipped with a powerful brain that permits individuals. This innovation permits more people to be supported, and ultimately permits a greater adaptation of the human population. Is there a possibility to remove this? Okay. And over time, we see these rotations of the wheels of change up to a point in which the pace of technological progress becomes so rapid, and the growing importance of human capital becomes so high, so as to induce parents to act. So building on the emphasis that Jim just suggested to us, this is all about incentives. At a certain point, parents start to have the incentive to educate their children. But as I said, given the fact that they face their budget constraint, they have to economize on the size of their economy, of their family. This brings about a demographic transition and permits move regime. So if you wish, if you think about the transition from water to gas that we observe in nature, namely as temperature being heated to the point, we see the gradual
Oded, I'm sorry, it seems that we've lost you again. Are you able to hear us?
You hear me again?
Yes, perfect, thank you. And your screen is slowly also coming back.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, you think about the transition we can observe is that in the course of human history, technological progress accelerates and inevitable point beyond which we see the transition from agriculture. It is based on a phase transition. Namely, it is based on the fact that it takes return to human capital to reach a critical point beyond we see the the to reality rates, and consequently what we see ultimately is the transition from stagnation to growth. The transition from stagnation to growth occurs in different time periods across the globe. Some societies are experiencing this transition at the beginning of the 19th century, others very recently, and consequently an enormous divergence is occurring across the globe. This is similar to what we see in nature in the context of the transition from water to gas. Not all water molecules are converted into gaseous state at the same pace, and partly it is based on the location of these water molecules within the teakettle. And the same is true for the world economy. Based on geographical endowments, based on location on planet Earth, some societies are able to move from stagnation to growth earlier than others. So as I said, if stagnation to growth and the roots of inequality across the day, the traffic force ultimately permitted the transition from stagnation. We see it across the globe. Now, as we move forward and we ask ourselves what status of human societies, it is quite apparent that the future course of human societies and the future of technological progress, to a large extent, is not independent of the decline in population growth. But unlike the pessimistic view that is expressed by others about the fact that the decline in population growth and ultimately the decline in the scale of the population as a whole may bring about a decline in technological progress and ultimately a steady state without sustained economic growth, my viewpoint is slightly different. Actually, the decline in population growth has conflicting effects in the potential number of innovators, but on the other hand, there is greater emphasis on human capital formation. So fewer people will be present, but in fact, their earning capacity, their productivity will be higher than otherwise. And consequently, the ultimate effect of quality with respect to quantity and the elasticity versus the quantity of the population forces are critical for the understanding of the future journey of humanity. Can you hear me? I mean, I'm a bit, hello?
Yes.
You can
hear you.
Okay. Yes, so this is concluding my part of the discussion. And again, I would like to reiterate what was stated by the distinguished scholars before me, by Jim and David. And I would like to congratulate Klaus for his incredible contribution to the development of the field of population economics, partly the creation of this important journey into the prominence that it's holding at the moment. I would like to transfer the floor at the moment to Klaus himself and to hear his views about the trajectory of the field in the past and perhaps in the future. Klaus?
Yeah, thank you very much. After all these in-depth reflections, it's of course difficult to add something really relevant, but I nevertheless would like to give a little filter from the perspective of the journal editor. Yes, obviously out there is enough topics, enough challenges, and enough importance that research can flourish in the fields. And I'm really truly convinced that we are running the most important issues of our time, so to speak. Yes, not only the last centuries, but also, I mean, the future. And I mean, what I would like to reflect, and that's point number one, is when I look at from the situation 35 years ago, I mean, economics in particular, not so much labor economics, but economics in general, was very much theory oriented. Yes. Also, the start of the journal was at the time where most articles were theory papers. That has completely changed, and the people sitting, speaking behind me. I mean, James Heckman and David Card have, of course, very impressively contributed to this development, making data and empirical research the core of the analysis from the perspective of a very rigorous and a deep statistical and analysis and yes, managing of the data behind all this. And I don't think that this will change. So the journal certainly has declared that we still want theory papers, and also the connection between theory and empirical applications should maybe become in the future stronger than it has been in recent years. Now, the other point I would like to make is that research has to decide, in a certain extent, people out there have to decide to what extent the pressure de facto of the huge masses of data we have now access to, and we are not yet sure whether all of this is usable, as Jim has mentioned widely, and also what is about the pressure coming through the social media and the more policy-related demands on our research, whether we can escape that, and also to what extent this has to be reflected in also in research published in the Journal of Population Economics. We will certainly want to focus on sound academic research. That is the condition. So we would not move away to look at daily issues. On the other hand, as I mentioned, I mean, COVID or conflict, wars, issue, abortion, all these issues, refugees, and so on. These are all issues which are not only pressing issues, but they also require sound research. And the journal would want to be strong, there. Now, if it comes to my own research area in the recent years, migration, well, certainly there are a number of global, very important issues which relate more to the continent of Africa, Asia, and Europe, so not so much of the United States, because we have a huge demographic imbalance in terms of the forthcoming people who are available for the labor force. Jim already spoke about Sweden, but I mean, come to Germany. My government is and the business people are crazy about getting work, yes, labor. But we told them 20 years, since 20 or 30 years, that this will come. That that's certainly an issue. This will come. The aging issue creates problems with imbalances for the labor market. That's one thing. So China and Europe needs to take up more people who are seeking work, which are coming mainly from Africa and from other parts of Asia. That's certainly one huge challenge, which will also has to do with research. We have to go into that. There's also the issue of climate change, which will affect these areas also very much important. So these are topics where certainly the journal wants to be strong and will be strong. However, we cannot give up issues like, I mean, the COVID, we have to become strong in analysis of COVID consequences and mortality. I mean, mentioned also by Jim and also by David that this is an issue. Mortality was not taking the right importance over the last decades. I think it will come up. It has also to do with the avoiding of mortality. Yes, I mean, so all the issues of the process of delaying aging, yes, which is something of relevance, which I, so far understand this, has also to do with behavior. And as soon as we understand behavior, we may also think about, as economists, about the right incentives to affect behavior, if we can manage that well. Certainly, incentives are also important in the context of avoiding wrong reactions as we have seen them in the COVID crisis. These are all topics which are of relevance. And last but not least, I would like to point at the gender identity issue. By intention, we have a session tomorrow at the conference where we reflect what GLO and the Journal of Population Economics is publishing and working on in the context of gender identity in a broader context. And I think that is certainly a topic which is also of relevance for the journal. Now, I would like to thank all the previous speakers for first of their presence. We all have seen that this is a very difficult time for them in various ways. I mean, in terms of scheduling, we are grateful that you found the time to come and talk, and also for your insights, which are hopefully also an incentive for many of our readers and authors to contribute new papers and research. So thank you very much. And well, let's go on.
So perhaps some concluding thoughts from Jim and David. And
well, let me ask you a question, Oded. It's more of a question for you. And that is, there's some work that you know very well, for example, by Deidre McCloskey, where he also, or she, sorry, tackles the gender question came up, sorry. He was my colleague when he was a he, but anyway, nonetheless, the question is about the role of the incentives and which produced technological, this explosion, this whole notion of how the economy expanded. And the perspective in that work, you've read that work, I'm sure, there's 3 volumes, it's vintage McCloskey, but it has some deep ideas, and I'm curious what your thinking is about that. And then some other work, which you probably are much less familiar with, but maybe you know the book by Chaim Ophek.
I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah, no, again, it's the question about the evolution of what we might think of as the modern approach to the world, and the modern, in the sense of the evolution of this whole question of the whole issue of how the economy expanded and productivity increased. I'm curious how your perspective would differ from their perspective.
Right.
Same with McCloskey. You don't have to worry about Chaim Ophek. I knew Ophek very well, but that's a different point.
So in my research, I'm trying to focus on what I defined as the wheels of changes that are universal across the globe and are operating in any continent in every region of the world. Now, the pace of this rotation is affected by other elements. It's affected by institutions, and as a result of it, I'm certainly respectful of the idea of Deirdre McCloskey and others that suggest that part of the reason that we see that these wheels of change are operating more rapidly in Europe than otherwise has to do with other phenomena that are occurring at the same time period in Europe. I typically attribute it to the fact that the European society is culturally more fluid, is more diverse, and as a result of it is more adaptable, and consequently the European society is able to adopt the ideas of enlightenment and ultimately to launch the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. But broadly speaking, I do think that there are fundamental forces that are operating universally across the globe, but as operation depends on institutions that are basically property rights, cultural attributes that are permitting certain structural change in certain changes in the orientation of the society with certain perspective about the future. So there is no inconsistency between these viewpoints. My viewpoint is that first we have to identify the universal forces that are operating everywhere, and then we can focus on regional forces that are operating, for instance, in Europe, that has to do with the interaction between cultural institutions and these fundamental forces. So that's my viewpoint.
But you don't think there's a universality to the McCloskey story?
I don't think that there is universality, no, because I think that ultimately the takeoff or the transition is occurring in some societies, and there is a diffusion of certain processes, not necessarily of the cultural forces across the globe. I think that the diffusion ultimately is technological diffusion that is affecting the reward to human capital and the fertility transition, whereas what catalyzes the transition in Europe is sort of geographical specific forces to the European continent. Yes,
But the role of the Enlightenment in particular, that's key in McCloskey, and you also mentioned it a minute ago.
Yes,
I mean,
so
the
the
sense that
Enlightenment is critical.
the openness to ideas, the willingness to accept change and to debate it, but also adapt to it. I mean, there are many societies that don't have that feature, right? Or at least maybe they do. I'm not sure. In some of the
Indeed.
developing
So
countries.
in fact, I mean, so
Oded, we have difficulties to hear you.
Sorry, we're causing problems here.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Jim, you were interrupted, at least on my side, and I could not hear the entire statement that you made. But yes, enlightenment is critical for basically the future-oriented mindset. It is developed in the European society that allows the European society to move forward and to be so adaptable and to basically acquire skills and ideas that were not present earlier. But I don't think that we see necessarily the diffusion of the ideas of enlightenment into other continents. Ultimately, we see the diffusion of technologies, and through technologies, we see the diffusion of the demographic transition and other forces. So as I said, when I think about universal forces that are operating throughout human history, certainly the Enlightenment period cannot explain to us the period between 300,000 years ago and the eve of industrialization. This is a time period that is governed by the Malthusian forces, and this is a time period in which, in fact, technological progress is counterbalanced by population growth, and these ideas of enlightenment are not part of it. Now, we get into a critical point in which technological acceleration takes place, and this technological acceleration generates the incentive to adopt different cultural traits that are more future-oriented. In fact, the legacy of the past is important than a future-oriented mindset. So for a long period of time, relying on ancient culture was beneficial for societies, but at a certain point, this reliance is no longer beneficial due to the fact that the technological environment is changing so rapidly and the adoption of new cultural traits becomes beneficial. So this is European specific at the time, and ultimately there is some diffusion into other continents, but it is not necessarily the diffusion of the principles of the Enlightenment. That's my viewpoint.
So do you think there'll be a universal culture as a result of technical change 100 years from now?
I don't think that there will be universal culture. I think that, in fact, societies will...
Can I cannot hear you.
I should stop.
I think, yeah, maybe we also a little bit out of time. Of course, how can I stop you? I mean, it's impossible. But we should give David the last word, perhaps, and
yeah, but perhaps David. I mean, we did not allow David to express his final views. David,
yes,
can
that
you
was my suggestion.
No, I don't really have anything to say.
Okay.
You know, this kind of topic is a little above my pay grade.
Okay, so let me conclude. This was really wonderful to have David and Jim, such notable scholars in the panel, and naturally major contributors to the field of population economics. It was wonderful to have Klaus, that as we all agreed, that vital contribution to the development and the decimation of these ideas. And I'm honored to be part of this panel and part of this discussion. So thank you very much to all of you. And I'm really sorry about the interruptions, at least on my side, but apparently technology is still not perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We are closing the session. See you again if you have time in half an hour or less than half an hour for the next session. Thank you.